Welcome to Black Hat Windows 2K Security, held February 14th through the 15th, 2001 in Las Vegas, Nevada. The following videotape was recorded live at the conference and produced by the Sound of Knowledge Incorporated. This is videotape number 14, Technical Track, by Eric Schultz and David LeBlanc.
It's my job to hack Microsoft, actually, and then go make people fix it when I do manage to get in. So I have a lot of fun. I also learn a lot about how to secure things. And this whole presentation came actually from a public argument that I was having with J.D. Glasser about how to secure things when I noticed that the machine that I'd set up for eWeek's original Open Hack contest, which is an NT4 box, would have remained secure against the Unicode bug just because of the way that I set it up. Because I went through some extra measures. Because you really can't be too paranoid when you're going to stick a box on the internet and ask for people to hack it. And so the box came through that exploit really just fine, and or through the test just fine. And I realized that a year later, even without any patches applied, it would probably have remained secure just because of some underlying good practices that we put on here. And so we're going to demonstrate some of those today.
Right. Question, what is JD? JD is JD Glazer from formerly of NT Objectives, now with Foundstone. He was presenting earlier in the week here.
And he did a presentation yesterday on how to break into boxes. And so we're going to show you how to stop him from breaking into boxes.
We've got a couple other surprises for some other folks in here as well as we get there. I'm Eric Schultz. I work in the Security Response Center at Microsoft. Answer to secure@microsoft.com. I work with a few other folks up there. And we write a lot of the security bulletins and help release the patches and so forth to keep your boxes secure. So we'll talk about some things that are going on there as well. The presentation was finished about 5 minutes ago, so you don't have a copy of that on your CD. We'll give the presentation to Jeff, and he can put it up on the Black Hat site as soon as the weekend's over. Do you want to introduce what we're doing? Okay. We're going to call this defense in depth. We're going to take multiple steps to secure a box. If you forget any one of these things, it's okay, because any one of the other measures will probably stop the hacker as well. So we'll go through, we're going to do a couple demos against some live boxes up here, show what can and can't happen in different instances. And we've got some examples of David's eWeek experiences that we'll get to as we go through as well. So we're going to start with the top 10 list. We're going to start with 10 and go down to 1. And we'll start with one, hopefully, that's kind of more present on everyone's mind.
All right.
All right.
Let's go on.
No, seriously, if you received the Anna Kournikova virus that was going around through Outlook, things you can do there to stop the script kiddies from sending you things is to apply the Outlook security update, move Outlook into the restricted sites zone, and I believe the update does that for you. And it's also going to restrict the active scripting in Java and so forth that can be executed so that you're not
really hard,
propagating stuff.
The don't be stupid part.
Yeah.
I don't know. Someone suggested proper application of lead, but that seems a little unnecessarily violent. The other thing is don't read your email on a web server. So that's step one.
All right. Yes.
You say Outlook. Is there any difference between Outlook 2000 and other forms of Outlook, or is that apply to all?
The question on Outlook, does this apply to Outlook 2000 and or prior versions? I believe the Outlook security update works on Outlook 98 and Outlook 2000 and 2000 SR1.
In terms of security vulnerability of Outlook, is there any difference between Outlook 2000 and prior versions?
In terms of security between Outlook 2000 and prior versions of Outlook, 98 and 2000 function in very similar ways, whereas I believe it's Outlook 97 had far less functionality, so by default it's less vulnerable to some of these active scripting attacks.
But the basic thing to remember is whichever one you use, stay up to date and stay up to date on patches. So that's the biggest thing you need to remember there, and I'd like to move on.
Big one here, restrict anonymous equals 2. I believe we've had, anyone went to Todd Saban's presentation, he talked about the difference between restrict anonymous 1 and restrict anonymous 2. We'll show a couple things here we might be able to do. Have you applied restrict anonymous 2 against your box?
I believe I have.
You want me, can I try something out for a minute?
Well, you're going to have a hard time getting through the IPsec.
Can you turn off your filters for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
All right. David has a box that he has done a pretty good job of locking down. And so I'm going to try to make a connection to his box. He's got to loosen it up for me so I can do a connection to the NetBIOS ports 139 and 445. And he's set restrict anonymous to 2, so I want to show what can and can't happen there.
Well, now Eric also turned off the server service and the workstation service, and I'm not sure you're going to get anything, but is my microphone turned on?
Battery's dead. It's dying.
Yeah, it's turned on. Okay. But yeah, let's see. We'll turn off the IPsec and see what happens.
Okay, so I'm over the screen over here. We'll do a net use. Here, hold this for me for a sec. I believe you've turned off the server service, right? So I'm not going to connect in there. Do you want to? Can you flip that one back on?
Well, I think we've removed file and print sharing from that adapter too. So,
he's pretty well locked down, so I can't hack that box anyway, regardless of what the restrict anonymous setting is. We'll come back and I'll show you a restrict anonymous 1 setting, and I'll talk about the differences for 2 when we get there in just a few minutes. But it's important to note from Todd Saban's presentation yesterday that restrict anonymous equals 1 will do a pretty good job at blocking the enumeration of information. However, that can be circumvented in a particular set of steps. So restrict anonymous equals 2 on Windows 2000. Definitely apply this to your workstations and to your perimeter servers. If you have web servers, member servers, and whatnot, you definitely want to apply that.
So there's a couple of things here. You can always tell if a box has restrict anonymous equals 2 on. If you try and make a null session like that, it just says go away, access denied. So the amount of information that you can glean from a box that has restrict anonymous equals 2 is that it has restrict anonymous equal 2 set. The other thing to do is there's a knowledge base article on this, and it's good reading. Don't set restrict anonymous equals 2 on a domain controller or a server that has a lot of down-level clients. This is usually not a web server, but this is important to remember. The other thing that's important to remember is that your machine could become the master browser. And if a machine with restrict anonymous equals 2 becomes the master browser, then no one will be able to get the browse information from it. And it'll really make everybody else on the network mad. And this is listed in the knowledge base article. So prevent your machine from becoming the master browser either by turning the browser service off or doing the registry tweak that's necessary to stop that. I learned this one through the School of Hard Knocks. So.
Question, do we know what the knowledge base article number is?
Do a search on restrict anonymous. I don't have the number in front of me, but if you do search on restrict anonymous, they'll pop right up.
Sure. Tim's gonna look for it on TechNet, and we'll read that off in a minute. Of the top 10 steps, number 8 to locking down your box. Locking down your system executables, star.exe. I like to go in on my local workstation and take star.exe and ACL all those files to system full and administrator full. There's no reason that regular users or members of the everyone group need to be executing user manager type tools or CMD, shells, TFTP, and so forth. And we want to show a demo of something like that in just a minute here. Yes, question? Okay, a comment that you've removed system from from a lot of these things. It brings me back to an interesting story. I was working in one of the big X consulting firms years ago. Had a gentleman come in. We had spent a couple days teaching him how to spell NT. So he spent a couple days loading and crashing his box, and so he heard that the everyone group was kind of dangerous in general users, and he felt, well, no one's ever going to log on to my box as a user or as anyone other but administrator. So he started at his C root, and he ACLed C and all the subdirectories for administrator full and deleted everything else off of there. And then he went and rebooted his box. Unfortunately, nothing worked because when the machine went to boot up, nobody had logged in yet, so the administrator account wasn't active, so the system couldn't access the files, so it couldn't read the different boot files and system files to boot up. So I like to leave system at full just in case, but we'll show some various system, non-system things as we go.
Well, he brings up a good point there, because if you look in this, who's the members of the administrators group? Well, it's administrator and so on and so on and so on. You don't see local system in there. But local system, if you dump a process token of a process running as local system, you'll find out that administrators really is enabled. So local system account has access to anything that administrators have access to. And so if what you're worried about is your web server executing stuff like TFTP, FTP, net.exe, stuff like that, don't ACL it just to administrators full control. ACL it to like web admins full control, and that way local system won't pick up that, won't be able to run that.
All right. On the concept of ACLing system executables, I want to pull up and I want to take you through a hack that is currently being performed that is also patched by a Microsoft patch, and we'll go through that patch at the very end. This is called a directory traversal vulnerability, and so I'm going to launch that first against my box, and you see up here I've got an IP address, and I'm doing a bunch of stuff in the URL, and out there towards the end I'm doing cmd.exe. So I'm telling the web server itself to execute cmd.exe and then to do a dir of a particular drive letter. So if I hit this, lo and behold, now I'm browsing this web server box, 10.11.20, and I can get a complete list of all the files in here. And so if I was to, I can browse into any directory I want to. Now, how am I doing this? I'm doing this because I'm executing cmd.exe, because the default ACLs over cmd.exe allow members of the everyone group and the iUser group and so forth, the iUser account, to execute that command. So what happens if I was to try the same thing against David's box, where David has ACLed cmd.exe to systems and admins only?
Yeah, let's take a look. Change that same one to 30 there, and we should get a very different result. You're not authorized to view this page. Now this machine is very, very vulnerable to this particular exploit, but what can we do with it?
Vulnerable meaning you haven't patched for it.
Yeah, I haven't patched for it. MS 0078 and 86, I believe?
86.
86. This is otherwise known as the Unicode bug.
So because the web server is running under the iUser context, the iUser account cannot execute any of those files on David's box, so we can't run a CMD, so his box would be protected against this particular attack and the subsequent attacks on it.
Well, now, maybe you know, I ought to give you back permissions to CMD and see what you can do with it.
Okay. So David's going to are you using Cackles to do that?
Yeah.
He's using CACLS, which is part of the, I believe, just part of the OS, right?
Yeah.
And so he's going to give me permissions back to cmd.exe. Cool. So we're browsing your thing.
Yeah. Now, suppose you can hack the box now?
We'll give it a shot.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to the next one then. While we're ACLing the executables, let's say that we forget to ACL the executables. Let's ACL the directories, because there's no reason that the everyone group needs write permissions in the inetpub scripts directory. So if I can't write into that directory, I can't upload my hacker code and do different things to it. David, you want to, I'll start getting this thing set up here. You want to talk about how you kind of went through and did this?
Okay, well, I found myself stuck in a hotel room with a raw install of NT and Perl and none of my cool little tools. So I basically had to do this the hard way. So I used dir to get a listing of all the directories on the whole machine. Then I used a Perl script to create a batch file that would run cackles on all those directories so I could get the actual permissions on all the directories. And then I wrote 2 more really pretty brain-twisting Perl scripts to go from the output of cackles to knowing where are all the directories that everyone has some level of access to and get rid of the ones that have read access. So it turned out that there were, I don't know, maybe a dozen different directories that were writable by the everyone group. And so I went through and ACLed all these directories. And what you're seeing here, if you can read it that far, if you've got good eyes, is you can see the original setting and what I ended up setting it to. So I now have a system, and on a standalone system, iUser, IWAM user are both guests. So the only thing they can write to are things that are available to everyone. So in fact, without spending a lot of time boring you and tormenting Eric, even though he's got command.exe, there is nothing he can do to this system because there is no place on the entire hard disk that everyone can write.
We'll detail this now. I want to, on my, I have my 10.1.120 system is a default install. It's still wide open. And I'll show how I can write a file up to that system. Then we'll try it on David's box and see if that works.
Okay.
So on my box over here, I'm telling it to, I'm telling it to do a cmd.exe, which is okay. I'm telling it also to do some TFTP to come to my box and pick up the various exploits. And if I hit enter here, it's gone ahead and done that. And I believe if we go back and view this directory, whoops, we don't want to be hacking your box.
Well, you try.
We'll see that we've got in my directory a copy of netcat that I just uploaded, because the iUser account has permissions to write into the scripts directory. So we want to remove permissions for them to write into that scripts directory. If I was to try that exact same command that I had a second ago against David's box to try to TFTP something up and write into there, and we'll change it over to your IP. Get the nice old access is denied. There's no way for the web server system to write into the scripts directory. And when is there ever a good reason for the iUser account to have to write into the scripts directory? So let's remove that out of the system. Question?
So basically you're saying that the web server doesn't create any temporary files ever on the system, or I need a temp directory or anything else of that nature?
Well, that would be a little extreme. This particular web server doesn't. It's serving static pages. Okay.
I would end up having that. So if I type out all their scripts, find a temp directory that they have to have out there.
In a case that you would, then you could create a directory that would have that. Though I'll tell you, most hackers are going to get bored and go away a long time before they figure out that there's exactly one directory on your hard drive that can be written. And there's, yeah, you can give them write and not execute. That's a great way around it. It's a good suggestion. And there's a number of ways to work with that depending on exactly what you need to do. Yeah.
The comment is if you're using authentication for all your web pages, you're not using the iUser account, then you're not going to be subjected to the same attack. Sure, but just to be on the safe side, let's provide defense in depth and go ahead and ACL these things down properly anyway, and only give permissions for those specific NT users to be able to read and to write into the specific directories that you want to give them access to. Now we want to show that just in the worst case, because I was able to write a file up to the system, now that we've got different files up there, and just by hitting this and now executing the command, I pulled a shell back from that web server box, and we can see what context we're running in. And we see that we're running in the iUser context on that system. So that was against the default box. Now, if we ran it against David's box, obviously we wouldn't even be able to execute CMD. We wouldn't be able to write anything to the directory. Yes. So we've got a list here of about 3 pages worth of stuff from David's work the other day in the hotel room of various directories that should be tightened down a bit. So this should be some good information that you can cull out of the slides when Jeff gets them posted up.
And I'll also make the scripts that I used available. There's a couple things you might have to tweak, like I've got hard-coded in the name of my machine, so that it's not general purpose, but it's pretty close. So maybe that'll be useful to somebody. No, it was on and it wasn't working.
There it is.
It won't work for long.
Does it work now?
Yeah, I think it just went down.
Okay. I thought you just gave you a really hard time.
Yeah, we tried the O on OFS switching previously.
Okay.
So at this point, we have applied RestrictAnonymous to our system. RestrictAnonymous equals 2. This is for our internet-connected web server. Should this internet DMZ web server, should it be a domain controller or an Active Directory server? No, we don't want to put Active Directory on there. We don't want to put on anything else. We want it to be simply a standalone server. RestrictAnonymous equals 2. We want to do a bunch more stuff to it. We'll do in a minute. We want to ACL these directories on the web server such that JD can't upload files to the system and he can't execute files on the system. So at this point, we want to move into services on the box. There's always this great question, this kind of art or black magic to determining what services you want to enable or disable on the system. You want to step people through it?
Sure. There's a whole list of services that you can tweak out. If you want to get really paranoid, there's a few more than this. But basically, let's ask ourselves the question of, do we really need this? Does this need to be on our web server? Now, some of these things depend on how you're going to manage the server. So let's think about that for a minute. Are we going to manage the server through say, terminal services? If so, this is probably a real good way to do it, because we're going to get on this box locally. Are we going to have what's called a dual screen subnet, where we've got a back end where we expect a lot of services to be enabled? Well, if so, then this is a little bit overkill, because we're going to shut down some stuff that makes the server administrable from the back end, and then we have to take some additional steps on the front end. But this is a good general checklist for a single-homed web server in a DMZ that is going to be administered via terminal services. So we don't want the alerter service running. Really, all it's really very good for is having little pop-up boxes pop up. Computer browser, we probably want to turn that off anyway. You really ought to run your world off of DNS, not browsers to begin with. So turning off computer browser is a good thing. Anyway, we shut down the indexing service because, well, we're not indexing our pages. We're not providing an index to them. My general rule of thumb is, if you're not using it, turn it off. If you don't know that you need it, turn it off. Same thing with Messenger. It's good for a bunch of pop-ups. You know, why does a web server need to be a printer? Or, you know, so we don't need print spooler. Remote registry, distributed file system, workstation, server. These are all things that allow the box to be accessed via normal types of mechanisms. and we're going to go ahead and shut those down because, as we've just seen from our attempt to demo RestrictAnonymous, it provides layer upon layer upon layer of protection, and that's what it's about. Because somebody might come along and, you know, undo one thing. You know, your junior admin sits down at the box and wants to do something. It's not working, so he undoes something, and then he forgets about it and runs off. Well, if you've got several layers, the odds of them correctly undoing all of them without having to go ask somebody who will tell them not to is kind of small. And then we turn off Telnet and turn off SMTP because, well, we're not using it.
I did a little example here of the messenger service, just so you're familiar with what this is. I went from the web server back to my own box. I did a net send 10.11.10. You've been hacked, and it goes ahead and the messenger service does this little pop-up. It was like from the old Windows for Workgroups or Windows days with the little pop-up dude in the corner of the screen, and you could send messages back and forth. So we don't need that open. This is just a good way to fool your friends into thinking you've hacked their box if you pop this up on them. We'll get into talking more about the server service and how you can disable that in several layers here in just a minute. Whoops.
Are you going to discuss the two network card cases? Maybe leave the server service on?
Okay, are we going to discuss the two network card case?
Let's see if we got time.
I think somebody mentioned yesterday that I was kind of the king of this dual-homed boxes and how these can be major security vulnerabilities. So if we got a chance, we'll talk about that. We'll show where you can lock that down a bit. Number 5 on the top 10 list of things you can do to lock down the box is to filter your ports. So I put up a default list of the ports that show up on a Windows 2000 Active Directory server. These are all things that you should be aware of before you drop, particularly an Active Directory server box out on the internet or unprotected anywhere. 139 and 445 do almost exactly the same things now, so we want to block both of those in just a minute. The global catalog we want to lock down. That's going to be primarily on your root domains. Terminal services, if you've got that open, certainly. We'll step through a couple of these in just a minute. So what is the best way to lock these ports down? We've got a number of different ways to do it. We'll step through some examples of them in just a few minutes, but I happen to like the IPsec port filtering capabilities. This is not strictly IPsec, as in we're setting up tunnels back and forth, but we're using the IPsec interface to block access to certain ports. Question?
I'm sorry, could you talk a little bit also about what the architecture behind the actual filtering is? How does this, I think it's great, we should all be doing it. I'm just curious, how does it actually work under the
The question, what is the underlying architecture for IPsec port filtering? And if we get a chance to come back to that, we'll pull up William and have
Tell you what, I think William Dixon did a whole day's class of this yesterday, and I think he's in the room. Wave if you're here, Bill. Maybe he went out. But come up afterwards, and we'll run down William. He's the product manager for the whole thing, and he can tell you everything you ever wanted to know and then some about it.
I am gonna take a step back. I realized what I had over here. Let me go back just to flip back in your invisible slides. Telnet. This is a little tidbit I came across the other day. If you are running the Telnet service on your box, it comes on the professional and server, advanced server and whatnot. If this is turned on, anybody with an account on the box can Telnet to your machine. So a question came up on a mailing list and also internally about how can I lock that down to only members of a certain group that are allowed to Telnet. There's a little known group called Telnet clients, all one word, spelled up here. If you create this group on your local machine or on your server, then only members of this particular group and administrators will be able to Telnet into your system. If you have this group on your machine and nobody's a member of the group, then only administrators can Telnet in. And the Telnet service is hard-coded to look for existence of this group when it starts. If the group is not there, anybody can Telnet in. If it's there, then only those specified people can. It's written in the IIS-5 security checklist, and it's also a 1 KB article. Question? The question, how can you trust your administrators, and I'm going to go back to the Scott Culp Memorial 10 Immutable Laws of Security and law number 4, I believe. If you can't trust your administrators, you've got bigger problems. We had a question back here?
Well, we don't understand it either. Seemed like a good idea to us.
The question was, why wasn't this created as a default group and just sitting up there anyway? Don't know, and maybe we'll look for that in future product. So when we get into blocking ports, there's a couple ports that I really want to block, 139 and 445 being two of the big ones. What's the best way to go ahead and do this? We're going to use IPsec port filtering. The default comes with client, secure, and server. I like to ignore those and just start from scratch. I like to right-click on IP security policies in your local group policy. Right-click and create a new policy, and it steps you through all these wizards. There's also a little box to uncheck, so you don't have to go through the wizards. You can just get right to the interface and configure it. So we can step through and turn these things on or off. And we can also create a blocker so that I can or can't get to certain ports on the box. So we want to...
That's something important to remember when you're creating IPsec filters. There is no default block all rule. You have to create one. So go into that, and also you have to create a new action to actually block things. So there's a real good article on that written by Michael Howard. It's also in his new book, so you might want to check that out. I believe the article is also posted at www.ntsecurity.net, run by my friend Mark Edwards.
So I've got a default, I'll come back to question in just a minute. I've got a default box here, 10.1.120, and whoops, let me make sure I got the 20 in here. I'm going to go ahead and do a net use to that box that's running without any port filters. This is going, which port is this going to go against by default when I launch this? 445. By default, Windows 2000 will look for 445 first. If it doesn't find it, it'll then bounce down to 139. Hello. There we go. So I've now connected to it. And just, we've had all this talk about null sessions, all that kind of stuff. Here, hold this for a minute. This is again the null session enumeration people have been talking about. I've got RestrictAnonymous equals 0 set up, so they can bring that back. If we set up RestrictAnonymous equals 2 and reboot the box, I would not be allowed to get that information. But if I go ahead and disconnect from this, and while I'm disconnecting, I'm going to click on my IPsec policy that I've created. It's going to block 139 and 445. Hold on, hold this. I'll specifically kill it here.
It might not be able to get the packets back and forth to shut itself down now.
All right, well, nothing's working there. All right. Don't want that.
Now, I'd like everybody to notice these port filters took a place by right-clicking on something and choosing a menu item. Note that there was no reboot involved here. So that's a nice improvement in my mind.
So I've gone ahead and I've enabled the port filters. It can't find the path. It's not going to be able to connect up. There's nothing I can do against either 445 or 139. I do a simple right-click on the menu, unassign it, and now I'm going to be able to go ahead and connect. So it's as easy as that. You can enable and disable these. I keep one on my box at all times on my workstation that I can block these ports when I come to a conference like this. I don't want anyone connecting to those ports, so I enable it while I'm here. And I go back home and I disable it kind of back and forth. We had a question here.
Can the port settings be, filtering settings be sent through a script or any kind of programming interface other than just GUI, and also is RRAS on NT4 when you use port filtering, is it a similar functionality?
Okay, two questions. Can you do the IPsec configuration that we just did for these filters via command line? Yes. Is that, what's the command called? IPsec Paul, thanks Ray. IPsec Paul, and there's a whole command line syntax. There's some good documentation on it. There's also good documentation in Michael Howard's book, and there's sample scripts that he's put together. Also in the Securing IIS 5 checklist and related tool, there's a script that Michael put together that would lock it down for everything but port 80 and 443. So that's a very nice thing to script and unscript. Question on RRAS on NT4. It's been a while since I've taken a look at that, but I believe you can get pretty granular on what you want to do on this type of port filtering.
Yeah, it's pretty close to the same thing. Okay.
And I'm going to talk about some more blocking NetBIOS actions, different things you can do that work and don't work in a slide here in just a few minutes. More importantly, the internet routers. We all know that we're supposed to block ports 1024 and below with the internet connected router and just allow through port 80, but unfortunately we've let through the high numbered ports. So we want to block all the ports inbound from the internet and then just allow through those ports that we want to have hit our web server. Unfortunately, we've got a little problem there because if we can use something like this directory traversal hack, we can contact the web server over port 80, and then we have the web server initiate communication coming back to our hacker workstation. So we want to prevent the web servers from doing this really weird traffic going back outbound. So it's just as important to apply router filters on the other side of the router from the other direction.
And one thing I'd like to add here is again, let's go back to the concept of defense in depth. The guy setting up the router should assume that the guy setting up the server is an idiot and got drunk the night before and is going to make plenty of mistakes. The guy setting up the server should make the same assumption about the guy setting up the router. Okay, if they're both really paranoid about the other one, then the hacker's going to have to bust through 2 layers in order to get their job done instead of just one.
Exactly. Thanks, David. Unless they were both out drinking together.
Well, then we got a problem.
So again, there's no reason why your internet-connected web servers should be allowed to TFTP out to Technotronic or any of these other websites. Block it. There's no reason why your web servers should be able to do net use connections outbound to the rest of the world. If your router is allowing that, then the hacker is going to have the box do it for you. So let's go ahead and lock down the router as well as locking down the box itself. I like to call this section Foiling Feinman from the presentation a little bit earlier today. Ty was talking about all these NetBIOS enumerations and whatnot over TCP 139 and 445. So I want to talk about those 2 ports for a minute, as well as a couple additional very similar types of pieces. If we don't have access to 139 and 445, it becomes not impossible, but much more difficult to enumerate this information off of it. So we've shown that I can do a null session connection like I did up here and enumerate the usernames with 139 and 445 wide open. There are 4 different ways that I've found to disable, quote, disable NetBIOS or stop this from going on. Some of these are better than others, so I've got some screenshots of what happens on each case, and I'll point to some of my favorites. We've talked about IPsec and creating blocker rules for 139 and 445. We've got unbinding file and print sharing for Microsoft networks. We'll talk about each of these in detail. Advanced IP filtering and unbinding NetBIOS from WINS. Unbinding file and print sharing. If we go into our control panel network interface section and we see our local area connection for the specific, this is a little icon specific for your NIC card. If you highlight that connection and click on the advanced option up at the very top, and then select Advanced Settings, you'll get a little box that looked kind of like NT4 where you have bindings and so forth. It's really, really tough to find this particular interface. David found one other way to do it, kind of, but it was still different. We want to take this file and print sharing for Microsoft Networks and uncheck that. By unchecking that, 445 and 139 will then become unresponsive. 445 will disappear from your port scan. So in the bottom corner, I've got a little copy of a port scan there where you'll see it does not show up anymore. However, 139 will show up in the port scan, but it's like it's been severed and cut off, and there's no way for any data to go back and forth. So again, with one check in this one little GUI, without doing anything else, you can prevent a lot of these NetBIOS attacks against your box. Now, of course, in case someone does check that back on, you've applied RestrictAnonymous equals 2, which would also protect against some of this. If you have a dual-homed web server, as dangerous as that might be, you would have two NIC interfaces, two local area connections there. You would disable file and print sharing for Microsoft Networks on the internet-connected NIC, and you'd leave it enabled on the back end if you really had to do something like that. So that's a pretty strong way of locking it down. How many folks have tried the advanced IP filtering in NT4, Windows 2000? Did you enjoy that?
Doesn't seem very advanced to me for some reason.
We've got a choice here, which is kind of what security folks like all the time, that says block everything except that which I explicitly allow. So that's exactly what this gives you. I explicitly allow only TCP/80 and 443. Well, this has all kinds of problems with your various RPC services, your high-numbered ports, with your ACK bits and so forth. It's kind of a mess. But it will get rid of 139 and 445. So you could do that if you really wanted to. I still think there's better ways of doing it.
Well, there's a few caveats. You can't turn off ICMP no matter what you do.
That would be that one right there.
Yeah, that would be that one right there. And it also allows outbound traffic. This only applies to inbound traffic. I reviewed Elizabeth Zwicky's Building Internet Firewalls 2, and she argued that this was absolutely useless. And I finally argued her down to maybe it's useful sometimes. So that's kind of where we left it.
This also, this is a reboot required. I believe earlier, unbinding file and print sharing is no reboot required. You can do that on the fly. Then there's this other option in here. If you go in and actually click, like you'd think you'd do, you'd click on the local area connection you want to secure, you click properties, you click TCP/IP, and you've got your advanced IP settings. And there's this little thing, enable NetBIOS over TCP, disable NetBIOS, or let the server take care of it. So you say, I'm going to be smart, and I'm going to disable NetBIOS over TCP. Well, unfortunately, when you do that, it only disables 139. 445 still shows up in the port scan, and 445 still services all your requests. So you haven't done much whatsoever. You might be sleeping better at night, but it's not going to help you in the long run here. So I'd be very, very careful of this one, as it's not going to give you the complete security. You can do this to get rid of 139 from the port list, and then unbind file and print sharing to get rid of 445, and that way neither of those ports will show up in the port scan.
Well, one thing though that I'd like to point out though is it is still helpful, and this is because the difference. People say, well, what's the difference between 139 and 445? You can still do about all the same stuff. The difference is that 139 supports a whole bunch of stuff. 445 only supports the stuff that goes through srv.sys. Okay, so by just getting getting 139 out of the picture, you're cutting down on a whole bunch of old legacy kind of stuff that otherwise would be hanging out there. So it will reduce your exposure.
Reduces exposure, but you're still vulnerable to null session enumeration.
Oh, sure.
So we want to hit both. That way, in case one gets enabled or disabled, we've got a little bit of backup control as well. So my thought is the most secure option is to use IPsec port filtering, and on top of that, to use the unbinding file and print sharing off of that box, and that way neither 139 or 445 will respond. So in case anyone ever asks on mailing lists or in your company or whatnot, how do I disable NetBIOS? People always say disable NetBIOS. Well, how do you do it? Here's 4 different ways in the slides that you can go ahead and do that. Now, again, going back to foiling Feinman, we're going to take it one step further. Let's say that you've gone ahead and you've blocked 139 and 445. Well, unfortunately, you're running both SNMP and LDAP because this is an Active Directory domain controller. So you've got UDP 161 and TCP 389 working for you here. You specifically want to disallow access to those ports because they can be used in much the same way to enumerate full amounts of information about the user. So we can block the UDP 161 or simply not install SNMP. If you do have LDAP running, and Windows 2000 uses a lot of LDAP, we don't want to allow that through the internet routers. So we want to block 389 at the internet routers, block it at your firewalls unless you really need it and set it up specifically for it. Now the question, where you come in here, you go.
Well, I think I got it. Yeah, I've got a mic now. Cool. Okay. If you really need SNMP, or as my friend Mike Warfield says, security not my problem. If you really need that on your network, you can shut down the user enumeration and all that sort of stuff by going in and taking a particular DLL out of the registry, and it unmaps all that functionality. So you can still use it to send traps and that sort of thing. People can't use it to enumerate your user services and that sort of thing.
Question.
The IPsec filter, does it apply to individual adapters, or is it a global set?
Question, the IPsec filter, does it apply to individual adapters or can we go in
Individual adapters.
It's actually beautiful where you can select your adapter. You can select from any source to any source, and then you can select individual IPs if you've got multiple IPs. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in saying where it's coming from, going to. Dave.
It also does something kind of cool too, because you can choose whether it applies to your local network or a RAS type connection where you may have a very different IP all the time. So you can apply different rules there.
We're gonna shut up now and let the
nice.
we're gonna let the expert answer this for us. William.
So the IPsec filter is an IP filter. You cannot specify an interface. You can specify the IP address, which of course is uniquely identified with the interface. So if you have one interface with 5,000 IP addresses, you can filter specifically on one of them. But you can't specify an interface. You can say my IP address, which will be automatically interpreted and say all IP addresses on all interfaces. But you can't specify a particular interface, like a layer 2 interface, in the IPsec filter.
So if you
Thanks,
have a
Wayne.
local home server, you can just give the specific IP address of each adapter, and that way you can
Yeah, I mean, basically, you know the IP adapter, you know the IP address on the adapter, and you can be specific to the IP address.
It can also distinguish between LAN adapters and RAS adapters.
Great. Dave, question?
What's that DLL and where do we get it?
Oh, geez. I've got a lot of registry stuff memorized, but not this one.
Dave can get back on that one.
I can get back to you on that one. I could probably look it up.
When you're when you're doing your Active Directory setup, you see a screen that looks like this that says, would you like to weaken your permissions on Active Directory? The default is yes, and there's a big caution sign that says, warning, anonymous users can read information. So if you've taken the default settings, then someone can do a Feinman-esque enumeration over LDAP. So you want to set it to no, don't do it here. Or you want to later go back and remove the everyone group out of the pre-Windows 2000 compatibility group. The reasons why this is defaulting here is that if you have an NT4 RAS server or a SQL server, they both need to do these anonymous lookups need to be done against these servers, which is why it defaults this way. But if you're not running either of these things, then go ahead and install the Active Directory in a more secure format.
Okay. One of the first things that they tell you to do on the IIS-5 security checklist is to apply the security templates. And the one that I used on this particular server was the one that's HiSec Web, and it's custom built by Michael Howard for web servers. And you can download it right off of our website. Wish we had a URL for that. But if you go to Microsoft.com/security and look at the tools and then checklists and find the IIS-5 checklist, it's right there in the middle of it. You can't miss it.
Okay, that's Microsoft.com/technet/security/tools.
But security will still get you there.
The IIS-5 checklist that we're referencing is a wealth of good information. We tried to highlight some of those pieces here regarding removing sample applications and help files that aren't needed. I tried to point to some of those here. ACLing the IIS log file, so if a hacker does get in, maybe they're not going to be able to delete it unless they're an administrator. Enabling logging so you can view something like this directory traversal exploit that's going on. You can actually see that occurring in your IIS logs. So you want to both enable the logging and review those logs.
And actually, something we're going to have to follow up on with Mike once we get back is that it's said to everyone read, write, change. Well, I've got mine locked down where it's everyone read, and it seems to be logging just fine. So we're going to have to follow up on that, check it out.
We want to take out file system object, or FSO, so we can unregister that. If you have an IIS-4 box that you've upgraded to IIS-5, then you want to remove the IIS admin password directory. Script mappings, .htr files, those are Scott Culp's favorite things to deal with. He'll tell you right off the bat, go ahead and unmap that through the IIS-5 GUI. Same thing for IIS-4. Get rid of that stuff. There's also a check mark for disabling parent paths.
And this goes double for .htr. Just get rid of it. Most people don't need it. Very, very few people actually need it. And unless you're one of them, then just bag it. Get rid of it. That way you don't have to patch it.
There are some other various websites that might ship on IIS-5. Get rid of those if you're not using them. Permissions Wizard. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, Permissions Wizard is a really cool thing that actually I personally didn't know about until just yesterday. But you can right-click on any directory within a website and choose All Tasks, and it's got a Permissions Wizard. And when it's done, the permissions on the site are actually a little bit conservative. So no, default it isn't quite right there, but we really try and make it easy for you to go ahead and bring the site into something that's pretty reasonably secure. So, you know, check it out, play with it, see what you can do. Sometimes I say it's a little bit conservative. I had to loosen up my scripts directory to get this exploit to fire because it set my scripts directory not to allow any scripts to run, which is, you know, probably not a good thing. But yeah, it's a cool thing. Another issue here is go ahead and disable Windows auth on directories that don't need it. Because if somebody really knows what they're doing and Windows auth is enabled, well, they could, you know, basically test passwords and try accounts and do things like that all across the web. Whereas if it's just, you know, regular pages, it's public access anyway, then you don't need people trying to authenticate to it. So just make it anonymous access only, and now people can't use that method to try and test your passwords.
The number one of the top 10 steps to do to secure your server or your workstation is to apply the patches. If you're running a web server NT4 or IIS4, IIS5, you want to apply MS00-086 for the directory traversal vulnerability. If you're running IIS4, you also want to read the bulletin about the MDAC RDS vulnerabilities. This 86 patch supersedes 57 and 78, so if you apply the latest, then you'll be fairly up to date. You also want to go to Microsoft.com/security and view all the security bulletins by product to lock them down.
Well, that's right, I got a mic. Another thing is go to the website and pull down the IIS Hotfix security tool. Real nice guy internally named Thomas Dimmel wrote this thing, and it pops out to an XML file, and it compares the patches that should be applied to IIS to what's actually applied on your own box. And it's really, really nice tool. Makes it very easy to stay up to date on patches for
IIS.
So, David, I heard you mention XML. One of our projects we're working on in our group is putting together a new bulletin XML page. So pretty soon you'll go up here. This is the current search page to look for your security bulletins. We're going to remove the search by year. We've got search by product there in the middle you can kind of see. So you can pick IIS 4, IIS 5, Windows NT4 workstation. We're adding in a category called search by service pack, so that you can pick NT4 workstation, Service Pack 6A, and then you're only going to see those patches that are applicable and meant to go on 6A, or Service Pack 5, or Windows 2000 Service Pack 1. You can see all the post-SP1 hotfixes. It's kind of similar to the old FTP directories where we had all the post-SP hotfixes. So this new XML database will contain all that cross-referenced information, so you can get a little more information on what you want to do. Now, if you're hardcore and you want to get a lot of information, you want to get the nitty-gritty details on every single file in every single patch that we've got. This is a picture of our editor for our XML interface that we're the XML interface for the database we're putting together. This is patch 070. We show the various platforms that are affected, the service packs that are affected. We show the particular patch. The patch can be applied to Windows 2000 Service Pack 1. The patch has NTOS kernel.exe. You can see the checksum for the file version. You can see the registry key changes that get changed, where the file actually gets placed. You can see all that information is all going to be in the XML file that's going to have information on every single security bulletin. So you can write your own tools to query this. Other third-party folks can query this XML file, and we'll be slowly adding in new tools onto the website that allow you to query this database to pull out information you need to help you secure your systems. We've also put up here a list of resources. David had mentioned the HF check that Thomas Demmel wrote, the IIS5 hotfix checker on Microsoft.com/technet/security/tools. The IIS5 security checklist is very key, as well as the HiSec web template and the security bulletins. At this point, we've run through our top 10 points. We'll field questions for a few minutes.
Number 0, if you really want to be secure, don't plug in the network cable.
Question?
I noticed you said turn off file system on the guy, right? But I mean, it's nice you have a website, but it doesn't have functionality. I mean,
There's file system object. David, you want to talk about what that's doing?
the wrong thing. I'm thinking
Hey, what that thing does is it allows you to access the file system via scripts.
right.
Okay, now do you really trust the person that's allowed to add content to your site not to write pages that do bad things? Or do you trust that person not to become compromised to the point to where people can add pages to your site? Or maybe you're running an ISP and you're letting just ordinary users, God knows who, pay you $19.95, put content on your site. You don't want them to compromise your server. Okay, a web page has no business playing with the file system in terms of creating files, etc. That step prevents that.
Well, maybe I thought, like, for instance, Microsoft.com uses it to cache XML stuff, and they actually write and read XML onto directories on the web server.
I have no idea.
The question is, what is
They get a lot of performance.
the question is, what is Microsoft using when they want to cache their XML and whatnot on web pages? And I'm not familiar with how they're doing that.
I don't know how they're doing that, or if they even need that. But basically, let's put it this way: if you're not sure you need it, turn it off. If you are sure you need it, well, now let's take some extra steps to figure out how to mitigate those risks and secure it. Maybe you need it, and the solution is to restrict who can put content on that site so that you're really sure you trust them. So
Question back here.
Regarding that, we're from that team. Well, okay, and we don't create ones, but they're out there. We don't use file scripts about them at all.
Okay, so the comment is that Microsoft site's not using the file system object. So, any last questions before we cut for the day? Just right here.
If you're using ASP pages, does any of this have to change?
Question, if you're using ASP pages, will this change how you're doing any of this layout up here?
Not particularly. There are some additional tweaks, such as disabling parent paths. I think we mentioned that in here somewhere. It's in the IIS-5 checklist. If you want to get further into it, Mike Howard's book on building secure websites is one of the better references out there. Yeah, Alex?
I had a real quick question on that XML editor.
Yes.
Is that a tool that Microsoft built?
Okay, question on the XML interface we showed here a second ago. This is our little internal tool here, written by Mark Shavlik for us as a third party, that enabled us to put this together. The XML database was also designed by Shavlik and will be available on the website, and anybody can download the data from that database and they can write their own front ends to displaying, sorting, parsing that data, and so forth. Thanks.
Yeah.
So now with all these restrictions in place, how do you recommend developers get their content up in the box?
How do I recommend developers get content on the box? This particular box is locked down pretty severely. Since we've got, we're just now running out of time. The way that I personally like to run a website is what's called a dual screen subnet, where I've got a back-end administration LAN where I've got much more access to the back end of the box. I can check the registry using normal scripting tools. I can access the file system using normal tools, etc. And then I've got a front end that is tightly configured. Now that's not everything. You need stuff behind that. You need to assume that people can get onto that box and say, well, what can they do to that back end? So it's a little more intensive setup. I have taught about a 3-hour class on it, and we've got 1 hour today.
And that's where your IPsec is going to come into place. You're going to use IPsec tunnels from the admin LAN to get into that box, and really tighten down the directions, where you're coming from and going to. William.
Are you sure it's IPsec tunnel or is it IPsec transport? I wasn't paying attention, but I just want to make sure you use the right terminology.
Okay, yes, I'm not great on that terminology there.
Is it end-to-end or are you tunneling into a router?
You're going to go end to end.
End-to-end is IPsec transport.
Okay, IPsec transport. Excellent.
Well, it depends. You could really use both. So. And now if you're not confused, you must be him. So.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for putting up with us today, and we'll be up here for a few minutes. Thanks.